Ladies and gentlemen, the dear Professor Harold Roth and the dear Professor Tu Min, it's my big honor to host this lecture on spiritual humanism online between America and China. Yeah, my name is Wang Jianbao. I'm now working at Hong Kong Graduate School of Business as well as IAHS at Peking University. Institute for the Advanced Humanistic Studies. This institute was founded by Professor Tu Min. He is a great professor of philosophy. Professor Tu was born at Kunming City, Yunnan Province in 1940 under the bombing of Japanese Imperial Army and evacuated from Shanghai to Taiwan in 1949 due to the Civil War. So he got his PhD at Harvard University. Actually, Professor Ross and Professor Tu Min has an overlapped time at Princeton University in late 1960s. So that's more than my age, actually. It's my big honor to have this role to do this great job with all you guys. A short summary of Professor Tu Min's thought. Tu charts a course of post-dualistic metaphysics by initiating the continuity of being. Actually, that's his philosophy with the spiritual effort and characteristic of classical Confucianism. Professor Tu strives to improve understanding of Confucian tradition around the world by sincerely criticizing Confucius itself. That's very important. Actually, we criticize the Confucius at the most and even the deepest. And seeks to develop an open and dialogical concept of cultural China in the aftermath of the so-called Cultural Revolution. Actually, Professor Tu has also offered critical reflections on the limits of the Enlightenment mentality and the challenge of multiple modernities by offering spiritual humanism. That's our today's theme as a contemporary alternative to the secular humanism characteristic of post-Enlightenment academic discourse in the precondition of embracing the spirit of enlightenment. That's another significance. So we have to, and we must, and we should embrace the spirit of enlightenment to welcome the values of enlightenment. Afterwards, we could have something to reflect on the limits of the enlightenment mentality. Okay, that's some background of this lecture. And today, the title of the speech is the meeting of traditional Chinese thought and modern brain sciences in the new field of contemplative studies by Professor Harold Roth. He is a professor of religious studies as well as a director of Brown Contemplative Studies Concentration, Brown University. And this institute, the Contemplative Studies Initiative is a group of Brown faculty and students with diverse academic specializations who are united around a common interest in the study and application of contemplative states of mind. It's a great achievement, as Professor Ross mentioned, after 3 or 4 decades for this undergraduate program at Brown University. So we really look forward to the future achievement, further accomplishment of this. So now it's time for Professor Ross to start his speech for us. He will give us a speech for around 90 minutes. It's up to you, Professor Ross. since it's online and at the cyber world, so you are most free. And later on, we could collect some Q&A, some good questions. Before that, maybe you should, we could have some dialogues if I'm able to do that. Otherwise, you can go ahead as you like. Maybe if we are lucky enough, Professor Tu could give us some comments on that. That will be more than fruitful and more than our expected. So please, Professor Ross, it's your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. To everybody, 新年快乐. I also want to thank Huang Qi at the Institute for Advanced Humanistic Studies. And I want to wish everybody good health and happiness in the new year. I know things are challenging in China right now, and I'm confident that things are on the upswing and that people will be improving. I also want to thank Professor Du for many reasons, some of which I will go into at the beginning of my talk. So let's see if this works. I'm always surprised if the technology works. So do you see my next slide?
Yes, we can see very beautiful picture. And we have now 232 audience. It's a big, it's sizable for your speech. Please go ahead.
Oh. I want to thank you all for coming out this morning or this evening or wherever you are in the world. I'd like to, I begin by giving you the big picture overview of what my talk will be. So I've broken it up into 4 parts, and I will pause briefly if it's possible. I don't know if it's going to be feasible to answer questions about, points of information, something that's not clear in what I've said, but ask people to hold points of discussion until the end of my talk. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to my Laosher for life, Professor Du Weiming. He has been, from the time I met him as an undergraduate at Princeton in 1968, an inspiration to the work that I've done, to my training as a scholar in classical Chinese philosophy, particularly the Taoist tradition rather than the Confucian tradition, nonetheless, and an inspiration for the work I'm going to talk to you about today in contemplative studies, in the attempt to create a new academic field, really, something we've started here at Brown. I wish it were 30 or 40 years ago. No, I've been at Brown for 37 years, but I only began working on this about 20 years ago, directly working on this about 20 years ago. You can tell, by the way, how long ago this was when I started studying with Professor Du, because the notebook cost 39 cents. And these are some of my handwritten notes. So during the course of my academic career, I've focused on the study of classical Taoism, first looking at the textual foundations and the transmission over more than 2 millennia of the really important classical Taoist compendium, the Huinanzi, and then writing a book I called Original Tao, and which I'll talk about a little bit later this morning. In this book, I argue that rather than the Lao Tzu being the oldest text of the Taoist tradition in China, or rather than the Zhuangzi being the oldest text, that there's a very short work within the Guanzi called Neya, which I've translated as inward training, which I argue in this book is the oldest text of the classical Taoist tradition and contains the earliest presentation of techniques and methods for breath meditation, breath contemplation in the Chinese tradition and therefore in the East Asian tradition. I then later in my career went on with a group of colleagues, including John Major, Sarah Queen, and Andy Meyer, to translate the Huainanzi itself. First, we did a full translation, which is the book on the with the brown cover, and then we did an abridged version for use in courses. And more recently, I've published a collection of my articles that deal with the contemplative foundations of the classical Taoist tradition, how the tradition is based upon methods and techniques of what I call inner cultivation practice. This is a collection of earlier articles, but has a new introduction and has a new chapter applying what I call the contemplative hermeneutic that I've developed throughout the course of a quarter century of academic work to one of the really interesting questions for those of us who love the Zhuangzi, and that is, are the inner chapters the foundation of the text, or are they actually something later, a product of Han Dynasty scholarship? More recently, starting about 20 years ago, I began work on a program that really brings together my interests in medicine, in health, in meditative practice, in self-cultivation, in particularly Chinese and East Asian history, and a background of a long-standing practice in the Rinzai Zen tradition, to which I was also introduced by Professor Du, but that's another long story. To trying to develop a different way to approach the study of contemplative texts, the historical study of contemplative texts. With these texts, as Professor Du taught me, I've never taught them as kind of abstract philosophical historical relics or museum pieces. As he taught me Confucianism as a vibrant philosophical and religious tradition that answers important questions about the nature of human beings and our potential and ways in which we can create a better world, that these are relevant texts today as they were when they were written. Just the contexts were different, but the basic underlying insights remain extremely relevant. So I wanted to bring this perspective to looking at contemplative traditions, not only from the very important at a distance, what I will talk to you about today as a third person epistemology of being separate and studying it and looking at it intellectually and rationally and logically, all of which is very important, but also to find a way to directly teach and do research in the classroom setting using subjective experience, using first-person experience as opposed to third-person experience. Can we do this systematically in our research as humanists, as scientists, as artists, as social scientists? Can we do this systematically? Can we investigate human experience, not just as some sort of object, but from the outside, from the inside out, but can we investigate it from the outside in, but can we investigate it from the inside out? So as we've constructed this field, little by little, and it's almost like building a ship, building a boat plank by plank and launching it on the water. It's taken, I started working on this. I taught my first course with contemplative practices in the classroom setting in the spring of 2000. So that's now 23 years ago. And as we've developed this at Brown, and I'll teach you about the principles, I want to just talk about some of the founding ideas. And very much due to Professor Du's influence, I was introduced as an undergraduate to Wang Yangming. And throughout the course of my academic career, I continue to remember this important statement that Wei Ming taught us. And this is from Wang Yangming. The teacher said, "I can no more tell you about this than a person unable to hear or speak who bites into a bitter melon can tell you about its taste. If you want to know the bitterness of the bitter melon, you have to taste it, you have to eat it, you have to bite into it yourself." This is a clear advocacy of the importance of what I've come to call critical first-person investigation in advancing the study of contemplative techniques. Along the way, I also discovered that William James felt that not only could you investigate these techniques as historical phenomena, but their relevance to us as part and parcel of an education in the modern world. Even though James wrote over 100 years ago, over a century ago, he was as much a visionary for this work as Wang Yangming was. What James says is, and I quote, I'm going to read this quote, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence." So how is it possible to provide an education that actually trains the attention to look not only at the outside world, not only to investigate external things, but to investigate the nature of self-identity, and the ways in which individual selves interact with one another within the social environment to create the social fabric. Along the way, also, as it turns out, another pragmatist philosopher, this time a philosopher of education who himself had quite an interest in China, influenced the work that we do and underscored the importance of bringing practice into what we do in the classroom. He says, "There is no discipline in the world so severe as the discipline of experience subjected to the tests of intelligent development and design." Experience, first person, subjected to the tests of intelligent development and direction, third person. So first person, third person. And so in the field of contemplative studies that has developed, and now what we've done here at Brown has been become a model for programs that are developing in many other colleges and universities throughout North America. Somehow my slide isn't quite working. Anyway, so that one's working. So contemplative studies as an emerging field identifies the varieties of contemplative experiences, engages scientific and philosophical discussions of them, cultivates first-person knowledge of them, and assesses their meaning and significance. But if you talk about contemplative studies, you have to provide at least a working definition of contemplation. And so this is what we use. Contemplation, as we define it, is the focusing of the attention in a sustained fashion, leading to, among other things, deepened states of concentration, tranquility, and insight, a broadening of the awareness, a greater understanding of oneself, and I think this is most important for the Neo-Confucian perspective, self-contextualizing experiences that are the basis of other regarding virtues, such as empathy, humaneness, compassion, and love. It occurs on a spectrum from the rather common spontaneous experience of absorption in an activity to the most profound experiences deliberately cultivated in religious traditions. And so within the purview of contemplative studies come the experiences of flow, that they are activities that result in contemplative states without deliberately setting out to create them. Okay, so I'll say that again. They're activities that result in a contemplative state without deliberately setting out to create it. And so this concept of non-intentional contemplation includes a whole range of experiences, of flow experiences, this mental state of being completely absorbed, focused, and involved in an activity at a certain point in time, deriving enjoyment from it. Some people call it being in the zone. These are some examples. And the person who's really responsible for pioneering the study of this is the psychologist Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who just sadly passed away last October. His book, Flow, and the research that he did at University of Chicago first and later at Claremont University in California really laid down a path for the exploration of effortless attention and effortless action and non-intentional contemplative states, and really is directly linked to another important field that I will just touch upon and briefly mention today, and that's the field of positive psychology, one of the ways in which science has investigated contemplative states. So in addition to these non-intentional contemplative states, we also have intentional contemplative states, and these are the ones that we understand, we know, in some ways we know more about, or they're more obviously within the purview of this field of contemplative studies, of the spectrum of contemplative experiences, the ones that are more obviously so. And so contemplative experiences can occur due to deliberate and intentional practice, Sao-Chan or Qigong or Taiji, but they can also occur due to the intense focus and concentration required of secular, non-deliberate or non-intentional practices. And this is a spectrum of experience that people fall into and out of spontaneously or deliberately. But when they are deliberately recognized and cultivated, they can yield profound transformations in human cognition and significant epistemological insights. So the field of contemplative studies is devoted to the exploration of this important spectrum of human experience. It's a subset of all experiences. It's a subset of consciousness, but it is an absolutely important spectrum of experiences to better understand in order for us to more fully appreciate our potential as human beings and our ability to transform ourselves and transform the context in which we live. And just again, to summarize, We've got intentional experiences, such as, deliberate meditation, sitting and moving meditation. And we've got non-deliberate or non-intentional experiences that are included within the purview. How do we study them? Well, in contemplative studies, we approach the specialized spectrum of experiences from scientific, humanistic, artistic points of view. And particularly the brain sciences are the most relevant among the sciences to the study of these contemplative experiences. Not only the brain sciences, cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, but also the applications, the clinical applications of contemplative practices in medicine and public health. Many of you have probably heard the term mindfulness, and know, in fact, one of the most popular and widespread forms of mindfulness practice, mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was developed not far from here by a man named John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts. And much of that institute has now moved to Brown, and I'll talk about that in a minute as one of the broader activities of contemplative studies. So anyway, so we've got the sciences and of course the humanities. The heart of our way of approaching contemplative studies really comes out of a humanities model, out of a critical humanities model. And it includes, philosophical perspectives, the study of religious traditions, the study of world literatures, histories, and so on. And of course, the creative arts, the study of contemplation in the creation of and the appreciation of the fine arts, writing, and performing arts. So how did we develop this at Brown? Well, it started in the spring of 2000 with an application I made for a grant to the Center for Contemplative Practice in Society, Contemplative Mind in Society. And I got that grant and then started to bring together, I created a lecture series. I met John Kabat-Zinn that year. I put a group of faculty together and we started talking about our common interest in studying human contemplation. And then we, little by little, raised funds from outside the university. And actually since 2006, have had 222 lectures, retreats, concerts, and films that we have brought to the Brown community and to the larger surrounding community. We've had scientists like Amishi Jha. We've had Zen professors and former Zen monks like Victor Horty. And it would go too far afield to, especially with over 200 of these, to give you a complete list. What we were able to do at Brown is to support students in carving out their own majors. They're called independent concentrations. And so over the less than a decade, really, we were able to graduate 16 independent concentrators. The young woman who graduated here took her contemplative studies degree. Many of my students' families ask our students, well, you're majoring in what? What can you do with a contemplative studies major? And really, there's a whole range of things that our students have done. I'd be happy to talk about that in the discussion period. But this particular student who was headed towards medical school with two physicians as parents took a detour along the way, and she now is one of the senior editors for the New York Times daily podcast called The Daily. So she became a journalist. So little by little, we continued again to work and to build and to lobby with some of you who are in the world of universities and colleges in China and elsewhere in the world know that there's a lot of politics that goes on within the universities, and there are various kinds of challenges created by that, but it's important to, if you're trying to establish something new, to be able to skillfully navigate the shoals and eddies of university politics. And we finally in 2014 were able to get accepted as a formal academic major at Brown. And we had our first, this is a picture of our first graduating class. I'm very proud of these young people. They were pioneers, and also very proud of my colleague here, Dr. Kathy Kerr, who passed away later that year at the age of 50, but who is really one of the important contributors to our development for the better part of a decade, and created a really interesting research project on using Qigong practices as part of the healing for women who were cancer survivors. And some of those articles have been published. Very interesting material. And so since then, we've graduated 39 students with formal academic majors. We have also, in addition to the over 200 lectures, we've done a bunch of different things. We have this website. Again, if there's time in the question period, I'll talk to you about how the website got established. It was not something I intended to do, but thank goodness for students for many reasons. One of them is that they tend to be more savvy about computers and technology. We've created a whole bunch of different programs. I will just mention this list in passing, and I'm happy to talk about any of these. We've also created a program within the medical school, part of their scholarly concentrations program. And we have, this is another updated version of the scholarly concentrations program. Created a whole bunch of new courses in the sciences and in the humanities. And we've brought many of the people from the original UMass Medical School Mindfulness Center to a new mindfulness center at Brown. Students who concentrate or major in contemplative studies are expected to do 12 of their 30 courses for graduation within contemplative studies. There's 6 core courses, an introductory course with our distinctive methods, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, and then a final course for seniors, that kind of a capstone course that brings things together. And then they can focus on the sciences or focus on the humanities or focus on the arts. And everybody has to do a certain amount of work in what they don't focus on. So for example, science concentrators have to do at least 2 humanities courses that are relevant to contemplative studies and vice versa. I'll just pass over this one too. Okay, so this is really the end of the first part of my talk, just to tell you what we've done. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically, kind of focus down into the nuts and bolts of what we do in specific courses and what's unique about the methodology we've developed. So it's probably not feasible to stop for questions because I can't see people, and I'm not sure that Dr. Wong is able to see people. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if you have a point of information that you want to ask me about, please, write it down for yourself so that you don't forget. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, points of information at the end. So, 可以 that's okay?
Okay, no problem. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about this particular type of course we've developed. It's a group of courses we developed at Brown. We call them Med Lab or Meditation Lab courses. And what they do is combine traditional third-person study of contemplative practices in their philosophical and historical context with innovative, critical, first-person methods in which students empirically experience and critically examine contemplative techniques without prior commitment to the efficacy of those techniques. Talk more about that in a minute. So, for example, this is a page from the syllabus for the introduction for our introductory course to contemplative studies. And so every week we have a primary text and translation. Here for these few weeks, we're reading first my book, Original Tao, which contains the translation of the Neiya from Guanzi. And then we look at the Tao Te Ching in a section that we call Early Taoist Wisdom Poetry. And then finally, we look at the Zhuangzi. So we read primary text and translation. We read secondary works that contextualize what we're doing. And so this very important work I want to recommend to you, and I will be sending a bibliography to Dr. Wang after my lecture with a list of any books that I've referred to in my talk. So Alan Wallace's book, The Taboo of Subjectivity, is very, very important as a foundational work for the field of contemplative studies, even though he didn't call it that and or set out to do that. And then a work that I wrote that I published over a decade ago called Against Cognitive Imperialism, which is a critique of the Eurocentric way in which cognitive science and religious studies has been pursued as academic disciplines, particularly in North America, to a lesser extent in Europe, but also to some extent. Anyway, secondary works on the philosophy and rationale for contemplative studies. Here's Csikszentmihalyi's book on flow, sometimes a little bit of context on Taoist history. I provide some of that in my lectures. But then notice that we also have these meditation labs. So this is what you would normally do in many courses in North America. But what you wouldn't normally do is actually try out contemplative practices that are directly related to the readings. So we start out with a reconstructed meditation from the Guanzi, from verse 18 of Neiya, just on basic coiling and uncoiling in your breathing. And then using the one word Tao from verse 14 of Neiya. Maybe it's used as a mantra, maybe not. Or the famous bellows breathing, the space between heaven and earth, Lao Tzu 5. Is it not like a bellows? Or centered observation, like in Lao Tzu 16, keeping to the center. Or with Zhuangzi, we do a technique, a reconstructed technique based on Xiaoyaoyou. And we also do a Xinzhai technique, which I'll talk to you more about that in a few minutes. So the course is constructed so that there's a balance between typical third-person study that we do in our academic courses throughout North America and Europe, but then there's this first-person, direct experience, empirical experience, trying out meditative techniques that are directly related to the readings. So students learn contemplative practices, they learn the cognitive frameworks in which those practices are embedded, but, and this is absolutely crucial to the critical first-person investigation of these practices, they are never asked to believe in the veridicality, in the truth of those cognitive frameworks. They test them out empirically. They question, if a text says I'm going to get calm, why didn't I get calm? If a text says it's easy to focus on breath coming out of my nose, why is it so difficult? These kinds of empirical testing is essential to what we do in contemplative studies. And of course, essential to what we do in a secular university. This is a venue we had for many, many years. It's the dance studio, the studio where students practice dance. And one of the wonderful things about dancers is that they like to stay up late, but they don't like to get up early. So we had the use of this wonderful space at 8 in the morning and at 9 in the morning. And students got up even at that early time. Even I got up at that early time. A real wonder of the modern world. So within the med labs, it wasn't just meditation all the time. We did introductory yoga or qigong or stretching practice to get the ligaments and muscles kind of loosened up to get ready for cross-legged sitting. Most students actually did sit cross-legged on cushions, as you can see from this slide. And then we would work with a particular contemplative technique for 25 or 30 minutes. Then we'd take time for questions and comments. And then back in the old days, students had note cards, and they wrote down comments about the lab, about the practice, about what we did, asked me questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking in front of other students. Now we do that online. So there's an opportunity to get kind of more direct response from the instructors about the techniques or about issues that you might be having. So these courses are reflective of a particular approach that involves what I call 4 interactive epistemologies. As I've talked about already, third person at a distance, what we do in the academy. We look at the contexts, we look at scientific explanations of what's going on. We look at scholarship on the history and philosophy of contemplative practices, context, the historical, social, political, philosophical, religious context of these practices, but also scientific studies. There are many, many, many over the last 40 years. There's been just an explosion in research on contemplative practices done with a kind of medicalized or deracinated contemplative practice taken out of the philosophical and religious and cultural context and brought into, particularly through mindfulness-based stress reduction, but by other forms of mindfulness, into a kind of scientized or medicalized context. It's been very effective in treating many different issues, both of physical and psychological health and well-being. We'll talk more about that. So we've got third person epistemology. Second person is kind of a little understudied, but really in many ways the essence of the social fabric. It's one-on-one. It's intersubjective communication. So we encourage that in the classroom, careful listening to what's being said, fully presenting oneself as fully as possible when you're speaking, giving other people space to talk, to ask questions, to express their ideas. This is an integral part of second person perspectives. And really second person perspectives are fundamental to understanding empathy, compassion, and very important topics from the Chinese tradition, like in particular, run. And then first person really refers to subjective practice, subjective techniques, but within first person, and this is something that's distinctive to the work that we do, we separate out a subset of subjective experience. We call this no person experience. And this is immediate, non-intentional experience, not process through self-identity. So in other words, it's non-self-referential. And I'm going to really spend a lot of my time, the rest of my time today, talking to you about this and the ways in which scientists are now discovering that no person experience is actually not some sort of abstract idea, not some unusual or strange belief. It's actually immediate, it's real, it's palpable. They're starting to study it. So it's non-self-referential experience. So just going over this again, third person epistemology, we have that. Second person, I've talked to you about that. And there are ways we encourage that in the classroom. First person is, doing contemplative practices in our meditation labs, contextualizing our experiences in those meditation labs through third person humanistic and scientific information, seeing this experience in a critical perspective. And then it really involves something that we really kind of getting into fine tuning here, but because consciousness is constantly moving and constantly flowing, that when you look at your own experience, you're already separate from it and you're creating new experience. So you're objectifying experience. In moment two, your experience is if you reflect on moment one, in moment two, you're separate from that experience because it's already passed. Anyway, no person perspectives, no person epistemologies represent immediate experience in the present moment that is not objectified by the first person experiencing subject. It, in essence, is non-dual cognition. We see this in the research of my colleague Takeo Watanabe and Aaron Sipes on task irrelevant cognition. That is, I think I can say it quickly. So there's this really interesting phenomenon that they've discovered in which if you present a stimulus, a hearing stimulus or a visual stimulus, let's say that strength of that stimulus is 100%. If you then present a counter stimulus at 80%, it's completely not perceived, it's blocked out. When we all have experiences in which if we're focused on something and paying attention to it, other things that are happening, we don't perceive. 60% don't perceive, 40%, 30%, 22%, even though we're not focused on this new data that's coming in. That subjects way more than average, way more than expected, can accurately describe what that second stimulus at 22% was. Not at 18%, not at 40%, not at 30%. So what this says to me is that the human organism, the human consciousness does in fact do and can cognize data, information to which on which it is not focused, to which it is not paying attention. And so also tacit knowledge, knowing how to do something rather than knowing that. Kind of tacit knowledge is more embodied. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to, it's Wei Ming, I hope you appreciate this. Confucius at the age of 70 could follow, he said, I can follow the dictates of my heart and mind without transgressing the boundaries of what is right. So at that point, he was able to be spontaneously humane, spontaneously ethical. He knew both that and he knew how. That was a combination of knowing how and knowing that. It's no person. He didn't have to sit around and think, well, now what do I do in this context to manifest run? Just knew it. That's a no person experience. He did not need a sense of self or self-identity in order to do that, although he acted through the self. In the classroom, no person epistemology involves, just focusing on your breath or listening to sound or the feeling your body as a whole without objectifying it. So whatever stimuli are present without the interference of processing those stimuli through one's sense of self-identity. And we see this it's an important religious concept. We're about to look at it in the Zhuangzi, one example. We see it in Chan Buddhism, so-called Zen doctrine or Chan doctrine of no mind. It's non-self-reflective cognition. James talks about it as pure experience. The great Zen philosopher Nishida Kitaro talks about it as pure experience. Some of you may have heard of the kind of renegade Korean Zen master Sung San, who founded a whole practice based in the Providence area and spread all over the world. He calls it the don't know mind. He's got this wonderful kind of combined mantra and koan, which kind of exemplifies that. On the in-breath, he teaches beginning students, say to yourself, clear mind, and clear your mind. You say clear mind on the in-breath. On the out-breath, you say to yourself, don't know, bujur. And you stop trying to know. You stop trying to figure it out. You stop trying to understand what's going on. Clear mind on the in-breath, don't know on the out-breath. These are part of the ways in which we tap into what's going on all the time. Right now, as you're listening to me, there's all this no person activity going on, as well as the the other part of first person is like, this lecture's so boring, or he's talking too loud, or anyway, that's all going on. But the very fact that you're cognizing a coherent world right now out of all this data that's coming in over the computer and from the chairs in which you're seated and the desks on which you're leaning and the tea that you're drinking or your morning coffee or croissants or donuts, depending on where you are, or manto or xiaobing and youtiao. All of that is going on, and there's subjective activity, there's kind of third person activity. You might be talking to somebody, there's second person activity, there's first person subjective activity, but there's also all this no person, this kind of foundation of no person activity. And that's what we are looking to study. That's one of our epistemologies. Now, that's kind of the big picture of what we've done. Something of the rationale for why we've done it and how we've done it. But now I'd like to talk to you. I mean, there's just so many examples I could give you from the Chinese philosophical foundations before I take you to what brain science research is, how it connects to this. So I want to just focus on my absolute favorite philosopher, Zhuangzi. For many years, if you look at the promotional photograph for this flyer for this lecture, you'll see that I cultivated a Zhuangzi-like mustache. But this is my COVID beard, and until everybody's cured of COVID, I'm not going to shave it. When everybody's cured of COVID, or most everybody, then I'll shave it and go back to my Zhuangzi-like appearance. And of course, I tried to get my hair to look like Zhuangzi's, but there wasn't enough Brill cream or hair gel for me to do that, so I failed in doing that. Anyway, we're going to look at Zhuangzi. So just a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what the background that people have here. So I'm going to just be a little, assume that not everybody's on the same level when it comes to what Taoism is. And, you know, it's one of these, the most important philosophies and religions in the Chinese tradition, supposedly founded by this shadowy figure named Lao Tzu, who lived in the 6th century BCE. And interestingly enough, he schooled Confucius on how to perform rituals correctly. You know, the key, some would argue, not everyone would, the key to and foundation of Confucian practice. So how is it that this person, Lao Tzu, schooled Confucius? Well, I don't want to get into this in too much detail because that's really a whole other lecture and I'd love to give it. So, you know, invite me back someday to give this whole lecture on kind of alternative approaches to looking at traditional ideas about the classical Taoist tradition. But anyway, suffice it to say that that's the story. Lao Tzu taught Confucius how to perform rituals correctly. And then on his way out of China, he left. Of course, he was on his way to India to become the Buddha, as a later legend talked about. And to convert the barbarians, as they say. He was asked by the keeper of the past to communicate his teachings, and hence the Lao Tzu book, or the Tao Te Ching, was created. And of course, we now know that, you know, really for the last, I was just thinking about this, it's been a half century since the most important archaeological discoveries at a site near Changsha called Mawangdui were announced to the world. And the Mawangdui manuscripts that were discovered, that were dug out of one of 3 tombs that were excavated there, changed significantly our understanding. They're kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls were to the study of Christianity. They changed our understanding of classical Taoism, of classical Chinese philosophy and religion, and excavated manuscripts continue to do that. But Mawangdui is probably the most important discovery of manuscripts in China. I don't know, I can't say how long, centuries. So since these manuscripts were discovered, much of modern scholarship in the West has challenged this traditional view of the Taoist tradition going back to the 6th century BCE. And myself included, and I've argued for the existence of a tradition, but, you know, not a kind of like a philosophical school with a school founder, kind of like on the model of Western or Greek philosophical schools. I've argued for the existence of a lineage of teachers and students who transmitted a distinctive method of emptying out meditation. The technical term would be apophatic meditation, that I've called inner cultivation. So this is foundational to understanding, to the entire line, the multiple lines of teachers and students. And so this lineage or tradition is what later on, about in the year 130 BCE or thereabouts, Sima Tan, the foundational historian in the historical records in the Shiji, it's what he called Daojia, the family or tradition of the way. It had included the famed Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. But there are many other significant sources of early Taoism, the most important of which is this text, Neiye, one of 76 works in the Guanzi collection. And as I said at the beginning of my lecture, this text, Neiye, contains the earliest discussion of contemplative practice and of the cosmology of the way in all of China and therefore all of East Asia. It's one of the earliest discussions of meditation in the entire world that survived. So when we examine the tradition, the Taoist tradition, from the position that Neiye is its oldest text and that Lao Tzu is not, then this whole controversy about philosophical Taoism and religious Taoism kind of starts to fall away, and we see much more of a continuity of the tradition. Again, that's outside of the purview of this lecture. So those of you who haven't yet studied Taoism, you've got a treat in store for you. The Taoist tradition is based on this concept of the Tao, or the way. It's an ultimate unified power or force that infuses and interpenetrates the entire cosmos. As some people would object to this, but I'm comfortable with this, as its essential ground. It's like a groundless ground. It's like, you can think of it perhaps as an energy if you prefer. It's also the guiding principle within each phenomenon that enables each and every living thing to spontaneously move along the natural course of its development. I'll say that again. It's the guiding principle within each phenomenon that enables it to spontaneously move along the natural course of its development. So, of course, Taoists talk a lot about Zaran, about things that are spontaneous, that are so of themselves. Now, we talk about genetics that kind of explain why ducks have short legs or flat bills, and cranes have long legs, and ducks, eat certain things, and tigers eat ducks. Well, swimming tigers eat ducks. Anyway, so these happen spontaneously, but without the way, they wouldn't. So they're this internal guiding principle that kind of does its work and disappears. So the Tao transcends any one thing in the universe, yet it is immanent within everything. It is paradoxically impossible to see, hear, touch, feel, or conceive of as an object. But yet it can be directly experienced. And that's, of course, one of the differences, even though it plays a very similar role to the various types of monotheistic gods we find in Abrahamic traditions. Those gods, in most instances, completely transcend the dualistic world, the phenomenal world. The Tao is transcendent, but also immanent. Classical Taoist works claim that through apophatic, self-negating, self-emptying practices, one is able to directly experience this Tao. And that's because the Tao is immanent within every single thing. So human beings don't have to wait until they die to see the Tao or to experience the Tao. We, in every single moment of our lives, are manifesting the Tao, and we can directly experience it as a result of that. So I won't go into this in detail, but looking at not only the Lao Tzu and the Zhuangzi, but also the Huainanzi and Neya and some of the other Xinshu texts from Guanzi and the Huangdi Sijing, a whole variety of Lu Shi Chunqiu, not all of those texts, but parts of those texts. I've put together this kind of overview of classical Taoist inner cultivation that is contemplative practice. And so I've broken it down into these categories. We've got cultivation practices, like, for example, in the most famous one is a sitting and forgetting, I suppose, as an overall practice from Suowang from Zhuangzi. But so you've got Juan Qi, concentrating the breath, or Zheng Xing or Zheng Si Ti, sitting in a stable position as is recommended in Neya, and keeping the body still, Xing'an, Arbusu, keeping it still and unmoving, or all of these various ways of focusing, shou-yi. This is a shou-yi. Those of you who study later Buddhist contemplative practices in China know this practice of shou-yi, which shows up in the Northern School of Chan and some of the Northern School texts that the late John McCrae studied and wrote this wonderful book on. And shou-yi goes all the way back to Neya. First occurrences is in inward training in Neya. Anyway, and then you've got a variety of the postural, these are cultivation practices. Keep your body still, or there's certain specified positions or poses. The Dao Yin that we found from Mawangdui, the Dao Yin 2, which have the bird stretch and the bear hang, or is it the bear stretch and the bird hang? Or the bird stretch and the bear hang. Poses, and they're very much like Tai Chi poses that we see in that developed in the 20th century in China, but have a long history. You've got then various apophatic techniques: restrict desires, restrict thoughts, restrict perceptions, and then metaphorically, xinzai, which I'll talk about very specifically coming up. Zuowang, casting off mental fetters, sweeping clean the lodging place of the numinous mind. These are all techniques, cultivation practices, and then they yield a series of, I borrowed this from neuroscientists, temporary states that result from these cultivation practices: tranquility, emptiness, calmness, equanimity, repose, stillness, silence, serenity, the whole lot of them. And these are temporary transient states, but they can also lead to more permanent transformed traits. So Taoist adepts in our early texts, starting with the Lao Tzu, Wu Wei or Wu Bu Wei, they take no action, yet somehow everything gets accomplished. They can accomplish things. It's through effortless action. It's, I would say, through non-self-referential, through no person activity. They act completely spontaneously. They have perceptual acuity, ginger buhua. They have, instant accurate knowledge. They have a suppleness, a pliancy. They have simplicity, wholeness, and they have what we're going to look at here in the Zhuangzi, yin-shi, or what I would translate as flowing cognition. This is very important. Let's see, I've lost my mouse. If anybody knows the really important philosophical question of where does the mouse go when it goes off the page, let me see, my mouse has disappeared. Oh, it's right there, is it? Okay, I'm just going to scroll. Okay, so in the contemplative studies classroom, so when we're doing a class now that involves studying Neya, studying Zhuangzi, studying Lao Tzu, we empirically examine some of these cultivation practices, and we examine them in the cognitive frameworks in which they're embedded. And then we examine the various, we examine what kinds of insights do these practices, what kinds of states do these cultivation practices yield? And we're going to look at one example from the Zhuangzi. My mouse, isn't it terrible? Okay, excuse me, I'm going to disappear from the screen for a minute because I can
No
access
Yes,
here.
it works, yeah.
So this is a very famous passage about Xinzai, or the fasting of the mind. And so those of you who can read this in classical Chinese, again, we don't have the time to really carefully go through it, but here, unify your attention, says, this is Confucius giving advice to his favorite disciple, Yan Hui. Please ask me if you want to about the narrative structure of the Zhuangzi, because these narratives are wonderful, and their redolence with the cultural values of the creator and of the audience of that particular moment. Unify your attention, Confucius says to Yan Hui. Rather than listening with your ears, listen with your mind. Rather than listening with your mind, listen with your breathing. Listening stops at the ears, the mind stops at what it can objectify. As for your breathing, it becomes empty and waits to respond to things. The way gathers in emptiness. Emptiness is attained through the fasting of the mind. Perfect expression, apophatic practice, fasting of the mind. So this practice enables students, has enabled for centuries, practitioners, and now our modern students to empty out the usual contents of consciousness, and our students to get a sense of what it means to have what for Zhuangzi is an awareness without biases. This then helps give them the tools to understand, not just intellectually, but experientially. When we do this in the classroom, passages like this that reinforce what we might call an epistemology of the way. Commenting on the tendency for human beings to divide their world into things they like and others they dislike. The author of chapter 2, the Qi Wu Lun, the discussion on seeing all things as equal. It's one way to translate it. So that, most importantly, the author says, where neither it nor other finds its opposite, we call the pivot or the axis of the way. Where neither it nor other finds its opposite. This is just so characteristic of the sense of humor with which the authors of the Zhuangzi approach this profound mystical insights, profound contemplative insights, where neither it nor other finds its opposite, is called the axis of the way. Once the axis is found at the center of the circle, there is no limit to responding either to it or not it, to this or that, to true or false. All represent themselves on this circle. The Taoist sage, grounded in what I would say the non-dual core center of this circle, and can respond. She can respond to this assertion with what's appropriate, without preconceived notions. Respond to that anywhere on the spectrum. Thus we say that there is nothing better than illumination. Ming, illumination. Did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Okay. This passage is directly pointing to the Tao as this axis at the center of the circle of experience, a non-duality within duality that, when experienced, enables the adept, and enables, let's say, enables the adept to have absolutely no biases at all. Because then the adept is grounded in the non-dual source of all duality. At the Songshan Forum just a few months ago, I talked about this other really, what at first might sound like a peculiar idea, treating yourself as other. commenting on the human tendency to divide the world up into ideas to which we are attached, sure, and B, ideas to which we are opposed. Zhuangzi says, no thing is not other. No thing is not it. If you treat yourself as other, they do not appear. This is why sages open things up to the lucid light of the heavens. Theirs too is a cognizing by circumstance is how I would translate that. What it means is it's a cognition that flows, that changes, that transforms, that goes from moment to moment, from second to second, not encumbered, not bound up to a pre-existing sense of a fixed sense of self. It's very much a flowing sense of self and self-identity. So this passage from Zhuangzi conveys a non-attachment to the most fundamental of all of our cognitive categories, what people in the philosophical field of phenomenology called ipsity and alterity. That is fancy. Most of us don't talk like that. Ipsity and alterity, selfness and otherness, and hence the idea of self-alterity, treating yourself as other. It means that these Taoist adepts are no more attached to their own kanfa, to their own guandian, than they are to anybody else's. It's hard to imagine, but it's not impossible to imagine. If you can imagine it, probably possible. This is what emerges in Taoist practice from the total experience of non-duality. When the Taoist adept practitioner merges with the Tao, merges with the way, becomes one with the way, and then returns to the dualistic world. And when that happens, so that the Taoist adept lives in this dualistic world of subject and object. Looks like I skipped. Yes, I just skipped one slide. You lean on my computer and these weird things happen. So the Zhuangzi, particularly in the first 7 or inner chapters, but also in many other chapters in this 33 chapter collection, distinguish between, and this is the genius of one other very influential teacher I had, Angus Graham, A.C. Graham, who pointed this out in the translation, in his translation of the Chiwulun of Zhuangzi chapter 2, distinguishes between Weisher, cognizing by contrivance. He calls it the contrived that's it, and that's not. I render it as cognizing by contrivance. He also calls it the that's it, which deems, don't worry about it. Distinguishes between Weisher, or another way to think about it is it's cognition that's fixed. It's cognition from an attached point of view. It's my way or the highway, as we used to say in America. My way or the highway. You do it my way. It has to be done this way. Frank Sinatra sang about my way. He had very fixed cognition. And then Yinsher, or cognizing by adaptation, changing, flowing, moving from one experience in the next. I would call this flowing cognition. So really the contrast is fixed cognition and flowing cognition. But even for Zhuangzi, this mode is grounded in something different. It has a deeper basis on which it's grounded. It's the way. Because he says, this author says, at a certain point, even flowing cognition comes to an end, and when it does, that of which you chiran, that of which you do not know what is so of it, you call the Tao. Again, pointing out this, Zhuangzi doesn't say the Tao is non-dual. The Zhuangzi says that of which you do not know what is so of it. There's just this constant living in very much a first-person world. Zhuangzi doesn't do a whole lot of standing back and looking at his experience from a third-person perspective, or the author of this. He's right in there, talking as he's experiencing. And this is as profound an experience of non-duality as you can find in the classical Taoist tradition or in any mystical tradition for that matter. This is just one example of many that I could cite that provides the Chinese philosophical foundation for the fundamental no-person epistemology of contemplative studies. More, I don't know quite what I was saying with that sentence, the last sentence, but anyway, these are, Zhuangzi's pointing us towards a kind of foundational notion of the Tao, but it's grounded in experience. More obvious ontologies can be found in the later Buddhist tradition, very much so under the influence of the Yogacara school that came from India, in which whose main theme is that the so-called objective world is nothing but a manifestation of mind, of consciousness only. And it's, reflected in such teachers as Huangbo, who talks about the mind is the non-dual foundation of the dualistic world, and realizing that is realizing the Buddha. We don't have time to go into that. So these are just some of the examples. There's so many more that I could go into. There's whole courses to be taught, and I give a lot more in some of the books I've written, particularly that last collection, The Contemplative Foundations of Classical Taoism. So if you want to dig in more, I'll give you the reference to that. And now I want to go into the last part of my talk, which looks at just some of the ways in which scientists are investigating this particular type of contemplative practice that I've been talking about. The practices that are pointed towards the realization of non-duality and what that means. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples as a way to kind of bring together, just to provide the kind of missing scientific component that I promised I would in my lecture. Let me see. Still not working with the, is it up here? Got it. If anybody can tell me where the mouse has gone when you can't see it on the screen, I can see.
You move the mouse to your presentation slides.
Up in the
or you can use just your keyboard, simply, yeah.
Yeah, it's a philosophical question too, though, Dr. Wang. Where does the mouse go when you can't see it?
It's rabbit ear next to here, not a mouse ear.
So I want to spend a little time talking about scientific study of contemplative practices. 20 points if you know who this figure is. Probably only people of my age will know who that is. Anyway, the scientific study of meditation really has four general areas. As I mentioned, there's the clinical applications. There's the study of the cognitive signatures and the cognitive activity involved in meditation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the neurological activity and the measurements, the results of the measurements of neurological activity, probably the most difficult part of the scientific study of meditation for humanists like myself to understand. And then positive psychology. So just very quickly, I've always been interested in this. well, always is not accurate, because it only started around the same time contemplative studies started. It probably started earlier, but it got put together and formalized around about 25 years ago. Positive psychology actually studies how to create maximally functioning, optimally functioning human beings, rather than how to cure human beings who have a difficulty functioning in the world. This is the flip side of what most psychology has been devoted to for a century or more. The study of flow that I mentioned before, that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi pioneered, and later he plugged into positive psychology, or they grabbed him and took him as their own. But that really, the study of flow falls within the category of positive psychology. So I want to talk about this very interesting, actually Brown grad. He was from the class of 1943, which is a very long time ago. His name is James Austin, Jim Austin. He's still alive. He's in his mid-90s, and he is a neurologist. And he's not himself a neuroscience investigator, but he's a theoretician of neuroscience, in the same way that, you know, you've got experimental physicists and you've got theoretical physicists. He's more like a theoretical physicist, but for neuroscience. He's not himself a neuroscientist, he's a neurologist. He's written a whole series of books on the neuroscience of Zen practice. And I'm just gonna give you a very quick overview of how he approaches his understanding of he putting together a lot of research on the neuroscience of contemplative practices. So what he says is that practices like the apophatic meditation that we see in Zhuangzi, for example, in Xinjai, fasting of the mind, and many other contemplative traditions all over the world, create a shift in our cognitive processing from egocentric perspectives that are linked to a particular neural or neurological pathway in the brain to what he calls allocentric perspectives. Linked to a different pathway. And from this perspective, from the perspective of contemplative studies, we see that this really involves an increase in awareness of the presence of no person perspectives in our moment-to-moment experience. So, according to Austin, these two complementary neurological processes involve being self-centered as opposed to other referential, asking the question when you're self-centered, where is this in relation to me, as opposed to where is it? Utilizes touch and proprioception, represents what are called by neuroscientists top-down processing, as opposed to bottom-up processing. Allocentric use vision and processing. It's kind of allocentric gives you more the big picture perspective, and egocentric gives you the more narrowed down perspective. Really, one's not better than the other, but we tend to only be aware of egocentric processing, and we're not really all that aware of the allocentric processing, and we tend therefore to not develop it as fully. Now, Austin also calls out two different types of meditation practice. One he calls concentrative meditation, and the other he calls receptive meditation. A concentrative meditation involves top-down focusing of the attention on a specific mental or sensory activity, a repeated sound, and an imagined image, a specific body sensation, like being aware of the tip of the nose, or like feeling the breath in the solar plexus or in the belly. So Xinjia is an example of the fasting of the mind, is an example of a concentrative meditation that I think actually starts with a focus on sound and then brings it in and looks at the way we bring in sounds and then objectify sound into categories and so on. That's different, more extensive discussion. So repeated practice over time of this essentially top-down practice, which it involves focused egocentric processing, can lead to one-pointed modes of focused attention. And then you've got receptive meditation. It's more effortless, involuntary, and it's more inclusive. One learns to allow thoughts and feelings and sensations to arise while remaining an unattached observer, in theory anyway, without judgment or analysis. And this is Vipassana meditation. Those of you who know the Sanskrit terms, one's Vipassana or Vipassana. Insight is another way to talk about this, insight meditation. And this is the foundation of most of the forms of mindfulness that we find today throughout the world, used in clinical medical contexts, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, and so on. So you've got these contrasting. In concentrative meditation, also like shamatha or jur, yes, you might jur and guan are the contrasting from a juri, the 7th century, late 6th, early 7th century Chinese, really important Chinese teacher, founder of the Tiantai tradition, one of the early patriarchs of the Tiantai tradition. Juri talks about jur and guan. So concentrative, stopping, guan, seeing, stopping and seeing. Concentrative, top down, based on egocentric processing, guan, bottom up, based on allocentric processing. You can cultivate either of them, really, and different meditative traditions really fall into that one or the other, or sometimes there's a combination of both. And so if you look at a cross-section of the brain, this is from the left side, and this is the front of the brain, this is the back of the brain. You've got these two complementary streams. You've got the dorsal stream, the dorsal attention network, which is associated with egocentric processing, and you've got the ventral stream, which is associated with allocentric processing. And if those of you who are neuroscientists here, the dorsal stream associated with egocentric processing is primarily located in the intraparietal sulcus, a phrase that humanists very seldom get to say, or also in the frontal eye field. And the allocentric processing stream is in the temporal parietal junction down here, and in the inferior frontal cortex. Pretty obvious I'm reading that. So the dorsal network is voluntary, focused attention, top down, and the ventral is involuntary, bottom up processing. And these are complementary. But Austin argues that primarily what's going on when people meditate is that they are developing their allocentric processes that take them outside of the sense of a fixed self-identity, outside of how does that relate to me, and just out into the world, into getting a bigger picture. And so attended upon these meditation practices according to his way of putting together neuroscience research, you get a better attentional focus, you get increased bodily awareness, you get improved emotional regulation, you get decreased reactivity, and he says a detachment from identification to a static sense of self. Detachment from identification to a static sense of self. Now, in a really different field, this is cognitive science or clinical science, we have the research of Eric Garland and Yoshio Nakamura at the University of Utah. And they work with literally with a concept that they call non-dual awareness. Individuals who report, so that they've developed a measure of discovering the prevalence of non-dual awareness in just everyday people. I mean, when I first read their findings, I was surprised at how many people, just, not people who are practicing meditation, but people in all walks of life, not particularly contemplative people, meditative people. Some of them are, many of them aren't, who actually report occurrences of non-dual awareness within their everyday experience. And so they developed self-reporting measures, and they've tested them, and they've published them. And this one paper that I asked my students in the intro course to read is about this measure that they've used, this self-reporting measure. Those of you who know psychology know about, or clinical psychology know about the use of self-reporting measures, which are really prevalent now in the field of mindfulness. And they talk about non-dual awareness dimensional assessment. This is a tool to assess non-dual traits and states of consciousness occurring within and beyond the context of meditation. And they say that individuals who report more frequent non-dual awareness show a pattern of personal characteristics. First, these individuals report having a greater capacity to decenter from experience. Decentering may loosen the boundaries of the self by encouraging a metacognitive perspective in which one disidentifies from self-referential cognitions, and thereby de-reifies the self as the subject of experience. Basically, you get less attached to your own sense of self-identity, and you expand your sense of awareness to take others into account. You become more detached from the self as the center of your own world. You develop more, I would say, self-alterity, although they don't use the term. We're going to meet at a conference, so we'll talk about the term, but we haven't yet. Self-alterity. And they also say that non-dual awareness was more frequently reported by individuals who report being non-reactive in different situations by virtue of their ability to observe thoughts from a reflective distance. Such individuals also endorse higher levels of interoceptive awareness, that is, awareness of their body. Thus, it may be that closely attending to bodily experience encourages non-dual awareness. So these new tools that they've developed assess non-dual traits and states of consciousness occurring within and beyond the context of meditation. And really importantly, they have been successfully applied to the development of a non-duality based mindfulness practice that has been remarkably successful in the treatment of opioid addiction. So much so that they have now gotten this very major $8 million grant to further study this from the National Institutes of Health. Very important, because opioid addiction is a major problem over here. So these neuroscientific theories of the shift from egocentric to allocentric perspectives through apophatic forms of meditation, like the fasting of the mind, Shinjai, demonstrate that modern science is now studying and showing the efficacy of these millennia-old techniques. And so treating yourself as other, self-alterity through Shinjai seems to convey the same kind of non-attachment to the exclusive perspective of the self that enables allocentric cognition and the decentered non-reaction and non-self-referential metacognition found in Garland's concept of non-dual awareness. Self-alterity through accessing non-duality finds strong parallels. And I want to return now in my final words to my Laosher Due Ming, because what he taught me in the beginning has really influenced me throughout my adult life, and the opportunities he's afforded me from having studied with him are boundless. And the number of students that I've been able to teach as a result of his teaching of me, the number of students that have been impacted by what he's taught to me, well, you know, I imperfectly expressed and communicated to my students have made a real difference, I think, in their lives. I mean, I know from what they've told me. So I see that coming back home to Wang Yangming, and I'm really not a Wang Yangming scholar, and Wei Ming will tell you that. Maybe many others in the audience will as well. But in my shallow understanding of Wang Yangming, I see some really interesting connections. Self-alterity, self-othering through accessing non-duality, I think finds very strong parallels in some of the teachings of Wang on the Shinjubanti, the original substance or essence of the mind. It's a non-dual foundation that is responsible for Liangzhi, for the innate or the intuitive knowledge of the good. And this is actualized as the basis of the theory of the unity of acting and knowing. It is spontaneous, it is allocentric, that is other regarding. It is non-self-attached cognition, in which the self is treated as other through engagement with others in the family, in the village, in the world, not just engagement with the space in which one sits and does individual practice. So the unity of knowing and acting, advocated by Wang and other Neo-Confucian philosophers, seems to bring self-alterity into a social context, manifesting our connection with the broader society in which we live. It is closely linked to the developing awareness of the innate tendency of all human beings to feel empathy towards one another. It is these kinds of empathetic, self-contextualizing experiences that Wang emphasizes that are also beginning to be examined by the scientists who study compassion. But their work uses almost exclusively Buddhist models and really needs to be expanded to include Confucian models as well. And so the way that I see contemplative epistemology, contemplative studies epistemology applied to Wang's teaching is the no-person epistemology gives us insight into the original essence of mind, into Liangzhi, experienced through Qing Zuo, through quiet sitting of one kind or another, through various types of contemplative practices, leading to states and traits. First-person experience is reflecting on this to bring it to full awareness within the self. Second-person epistemology is direct, profound, intersubjective communication between teachers and students. That I have certainly benefited from having worked with Wei Ming more than half a century ago. And third-person epistemology is studying historical exemplars of this through various types of teachings. In the Confucian context, obviously the 4 books. And so bringing everything back to Wang Yangming brings me to the end of my talk this morning. I want to thank all of you for your patience in listening to me through the translation. I want to thank my translators for taking my ideas and bringing them to life to my audience. Without that, I might as well be howling at the moon, which it's the evening here, but it's cloudy, so I can't see it. I wish to thank Professor Wang. I wish to thank Huang Qi. I wish to thank the Institute. And of course, most profoundly, I wish to thank once again my teacher, Du Weiming. So thank you all, and I'd be happy to discuss anything that came up.
Thank you very much. Professor Hal Roth is a really an amazing and impressive lecture. I learned a lot, but I know a little. So I think some of our audience are very warm-hearted to read some questions. So maybe I can let them ask you a question directly if you don't mind. Is that
I'd be
okay?
very happy to answer questions that I think I can see. I see a bunch of tiles on the screen here, so I'm happy to try to answer your questions, please.
Okay. I have 那个静音的我已经解除了，有 just okay. Is 你可以问问题了。Yes, sir.
Could you call on the questioner?
Yes. I'm open the speaker. Okay. 请问吧 Leo 珍宝金
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Professor Ross. I'm an independent researcher of meditation, Taoism, Confucianism, and philosophy. And also I teach meditation. I'm very glad to know that you look at meditation not only from the perspective of Buddhism, but also from Taoism and Confucianism. I'm very glad, because I think the understanding of meditation, of consciousness, of life, of Taoism and Confucianism are kind of different from Buddhism. Two points, 2 questions. One is you mentioned the no person perspective. I think this perspective is more emphasized in Confucianism, but not so much emphasized in Taoism and Confucianism, especially not so much in Confucianism. Because in Confucianism, the concept of ego is important. Like also this ego or our self-identity is not just an issue of consciousness, but it's the whole person, including our body. So it has to be embodied. When we talk about embodiment, it cannot be simply a nobody perspective. This is my question. Could you comment? The other question is, it seems to us that meditation is not so emphasized in Confucianism than in Buddhism and Taoism. I think this is with good reason, because the Confucianist understanding of life is not just detached from the body. It's related to the body. When we have body in mind for the cultivation of life, we need many different training other than meditation. So 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful question. To your first question, I would say that while the what I would call the no person perspective is not emphasized particularly strongly in the classical Confucian tradition, that it comes out much more in the Neo-Confucian tradition as Neo-Confucianism has incorporated elements, particularly of Chinese Chan, but also of Taoism. And so I agree with you that that's the case for the classical Confucianism, although I would argue that there is a transcendent dimension within classical Confucianism in the concept of Tian, that sometimes gets overlooked. But I agree more so, certainly that's more the case in the classical tradition than it is in Neo-Confucian tradition. The Neo-Confucian tradition talks about quiet sitting and some sort of contemplative practice, cultivation practice, in addition to social practice. So there's an individual cultivation complement to the social practice. I would just fine tune what you said by responding in that way. And then the second part of your question is about the importance of body and bodily learning in the Confucian tradition, more so than in Taoism and in Buddhism. And I think that I agree with you to a certain extent, but I would also say that the body is very important in the Taoist tradition, and particularly in Taoist cultivation practices that involve the discovery and the circulation of qi through different meridians and channels within the body, and a kind of holistic development of mind and body together, a unified mind and body together. The Buddhist tradition, in theory, does put more of an emphasis on sitting meditation and mind over body. If you're in a monastic community, there's so much daily work and practice. You use your body so much that it ends up also kind of getting pulled along, I suppose, and getting involved. So thank you for that very interesting question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. And now it's this lady, Shelby. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Roth, for your fantastic lecture. I learned so much from your talk. I was especially struck by what you said about regarding how meditative practices can profoundly change one's cognition. I was just wondering if you're familiar with the research currently being done on psychedelics, and especially how psychedelics such as psilocybin can also profoundly change one's cognition and increase one's social awareness and sometimes profoundly change one's worldview.
Yes, Shelby, thank you. I'm aware a little to a certain extent of that research. There's from what actually some of my students are involved in that research, my former students, the most active laboratory in exploring the impact of psilocybin on human consciousness is the one at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, under the direction of Roland Griffiths. One of my former students is one of his senior researchers and co-authors. So I think one of the challenges that researchers who are working on psychedelics, and there's a range of psychedelics that are being explored right now. Some of them are not quite ready to be approved by the U.S. government for use in research or in clinical practice. Some of them are like psilocybin, but it's not used in clinical practice yet, except in the state of Oregon. One of the challenges is looking at the way in which, the way in which you prepare somebody for the experience. So that kind of maps onto cultivation practices, how that influences. So that's part of the set and the setting for people's experience with something like a psychedelic research, like with psilocybin. And then you have the experience, which produces a temporary state, which really kind of, in some ways, breaks up the different elements of self and leads to a profound temporary loss of attachment to a fixed way of looking at self and self-identity. But then, that comes to an end, and the chemical comes out of the bloodstream, and then people return. And then how does that get integrated into your everyday life? That becomes the real challenge. And that's a challenge that, so in other words, to turn a state into a trait. So I think the model of cultivation practice, which is part of set and setting, and state, the temporary psychedelic experience, and then the trait, that there's a real challenge in turning the state into the trait that I think that researchers are working on.
Maybe we should do it more often. That's how you turn things into traits, right? If you inject it every day.
You'd go insane.
This book is very important. Alter the traits.
Right, alter traits. Right.
What's your opinion on microdosing? A lot of people, instead of like doing the full dose, they do microdosing. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Certainly heard about it. I don't know about it. From personal experience, I haven't tried it. So, in theory, it might give you insights. It depends on what you're using it for. What are you using it to have a kind of temporary insight into something or some aspect of yourself, or are you using it for profound and ongoing and lasting transformation in the whole tenor of the way you live in the world?
Maybe both, because I read a lot of trip reports, and some people have profound they were able to gain profound insights into our existence, so to speak. So I guess it depends on the person.
Yeah, it depends on the person for sure. But I'm probably old-fashioned in thinking that the tortoise beats the hare, that the more complete engagement with a contemplative practice that occurs actually within the context of a philosophical or spiritual tradition is supportive of more ongoing trait development on a long-term basis. Perhaps there's a way to integrate the two of them together, but that's something I think some people I know who are doing this research are interested in. So thank you for your question, Shelby.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now is our another friend, ID. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, thanks, Professor, for your great lecture. I'm a personal practitioner of this meditation, and I'm interested both literature and also in practice. And my question, there are two questions. Question first is, in your four epistemological framework, how to respect and study the specialty of different contemplative meditation approach. For example, the practice of qi, the running of qi in Taoism, and Zhuangzi approach of Xinzhai, and also the Soto Zen, just sitting, while other Zen approach highlights the realizing of intrinsic nature. This is maybe they lead to the same experience or similar experience, but it's also very characterized.
Yeah.
And the question number two is, as the religious salvation intention, for example, the savings and the vows in Buddhism, and also we can find similar saving intention in Taoism and also in Confucianism. But this religious salvational intention is not included in meditational study.
Yeah.
How do you think this intention, this missing intention, will affect the result and the leading experience of this contemplative studies? So this is my two questions.
Well, thank you. They're both fascinating questions that I've thought a lot about myself, and I will try to give you some ways in which I've been thinking about this. One of the challenges in when you know, we're in a really interesting point in human history where, you know, Buddhism has been transmitted from one culture to the next. You know, it started in India, and, you know, it went to China, you know, went to Korea, went to Japan, and every time it moves into another country, another culture, it absorbs material from that culture, and some kind of new fusion comes out. So you know, when Buddhism comes into China, it kind of takes elements of Taoism and elements of Confucianism, and a new form of Buddhism gets created. So what I want to know is a question that I'd love to be around in a century or two to answer, of course. And if you're Buddhist, you know, I may be, but in what form I will be here is subject to some question at this point. Anyway, what happens when a religion gets transmitted, and what's essential to keep in that religion that retains its identity? So Buddhism goes into China, but it's still recognizable as Buddhism. So even though it takes in elements of Taoism and elements of Confucianism, then what happens when Buddhism now has come to the West? So you'd think, oh, it will merge with Christianity or Judaism. Actually, no, because in the 20th century, the predominant worldview is not a religious, in the West, is not a religious worldview, it's a scientific worldview. And so what's happened is that Buddhism is merging with science. And yes. So this kind of Buddho science or scientific Buddhism is created. What do you gain by doing that? What do you lose by doing that is what your question, I think, is. I think that what you gain is accessibility. So many more people can do these practices because you don't have to go to a place of worship or a monastery or a temple in order to do them. You can go to your doctor's office. You can go online now. And what is essential to retain? We have an old saying, be careful, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't know if that's going to translate very well. Before we had running water, we would wash babies in wash basins 100 years ago, 125 years ago. We'd put the baby in the basin and we washed the baby, we washed the baby. And then when the water got dirty, we take the dirty water. Oops, there goes the bit, whoops. be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think if there's a saying, actually, it probably relates to human experience. It probably happened. Probably somebody accidentally, you know, you're so tired, you have a lot of kids, you wash the bit, whoops, sorry. What that means and what that means in this context, and I don't mean to be facetious at all, but I wanted to use that as an example because I use that in my teaching. What's essentially Buddhist and what isn't? Some people will argue just the techniques of mindfulness meditation are what's essentially Buddhist, but I would say no, that there are certain conceptions that are part of the cognitive framework in which those techniques are embedded that promote a deeper and more profound realization than just the performance of those techniques. And that deeper and more profound realization can't happen without those elements of the cognitive framework from which the practices have been extracted. So, while religious salvation is certainly not the goal of many of the people who practice mindfulness meditation, not at all.
Exactly.
I think that they gain by having access to the techniques, but they lose by not having that as an element in the cognitive framework that they're using, within which they're practicing the techniques. And then the fourfold epistemology that I've developed is a way actually to systematically examine the similarities and differences between different contemplative practices. So what I didn't talk to you about today is that I've developed a critical first-person meditative technique that is sufficiently deracinated that you can use it to investigate Soto Zen, or you can use it to investigate Shinjai, or you can use it to investigate Tiantai practices, or visualization practices, or Qigong or Taiji. It's a consistent way to hold mind and body and to focus the attention. And you can actually compare different techniques by the consistent application of this critical first-person method that I use in the classroom, and that you need to see what all, you know, they all have different traditions, and they all have a different important teachers in those traditions, and it's important that it's essential that we respect those traditions because there's just so many interesting differences. So.
Yes.
Keeping hold of the similarities while respecting the differences is the perspective of contemplative studies.
That's very great. So it's like a container we can use it to study approaches. That's great. That's great.
I've actually used that metaphor myself. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we go to the next question. Mr. Kroger Freeman, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Professor Roth. I'm just curious. I've been to the temple for meditation, and I meditate every day. But I'm still a beginner when it comes to these things like Buddhism and Taoism. Can you recommend something for me to read, like to get started as a beginner?
Well, let's see. Geez. So one of the, I will send Dr. Wang a bibliography, and there'll be beginners books on Buddhism and on Confucianism and on Taoism and on contemplative, on mindfulness and contemplative studies. And then you can pick from those books. I think there's no one book I can recommend. I mean, I thought of about 6 or 8 of them right now, but it would just be too tedious to go through tell you each one with the author and their names is spelled and so on. But I'll send the bibliography tomorrow to Professor Wang. And Professor Wang, you can share that with the audience, right?
Yeah, I think so. If they can add my contact information. Thank you very much. Actually, Professor Wagner from Heidelberg University, he has a great book on Lao Tzu, Wang Bi Lao Tzu Zhu. It could be not too difficult for you to have a glance as the first step.
What was it called again?
Is Professor
actually there's 3 books.
Yes, 3 books.
He wrote 3 books. He wrote a doctoral dissertation. His committee must have been frightened because he wrote a doctoral dissertation that was more than 2,000 pages.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe a shorter one.
and then it was published as 3 different books.
Yeah.
That's how long it was.
What's your native language?
My native, it's English.
English is good.
Yeah,
okay, no problem. Thank you for your question. I think Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, probably some brief translation by Heidegger or who else would be good for you.
Heidegger, the famous philosopher?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, Heidegger is not a good Dormici. He's so difficult to read himself. I wouldn't recommend his interpretation. So there's an intro to Taoism book I like by Ronnie Littlejohn, and you can remember his name because of Robin Hood and Little John.
Okay, sure.
And he's got an intro to Taoism. I think he's also got an intro to Confucianism. But I haven't looked at that. But his intro to Taoism is good. And then Rupert Gethin, Gethin, his book on Introduction to Buddhism is also a good one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
And I will send Dr. Wang a list of books. Also, you can just write to me, Hugh, and I can respond to you directly.
Okay, thank you. Is your email address posted?
It's just you can find me online.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much.
At Brown University.
Perfect.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Hugh, and Professor Roth. Thank you very much. I think it's time for our lecture, and you did a great job. And Professor Tui Min sent his greetings and great gratitude to you. He's a little bit under the weather today, so maybe he will not say his comments on your lectures. But
Sure.
he does mention that you have a meeting at Santiago in April or
Yes.
something.
February, actually.
February, okay. So he's wondering whether he could attend or not. But I highly appreciate your kind invitation. Yeah, thank you for this kindness generally from Professor Tui Min.
Thank you, Jimbo.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Roth, it's very good lecture as always. And later on, we will upload to Bilibili website. The Institute for the Advanced Humanistic Studies at the Peking University has a channel on the Bilibili website. We will upload, if you don't mind, Professor Roth.
I do not mind.
Okay, good. And the audience today is very good. The questions are also very good. And your answers are amazing. We are all impressed. And cross our fingers for the future. And after 4 days, the Chinese Spring Festival is coming. So I wish every friend Happy New Year and double health, double wealth, and with tranquility, peace, and harmonies, especially during this pandemic outbreak moment. So we are suffering, so that means this meditation or the teaching from Professor Ross will be very helpful for our daily life. We are deepening our subjectivity, and with a further deepened subjectivities, and we could have more communication and to find more authentic life. As the Professor Fingeret mentioned, the secular as sacred. So just now we also discussed the religiousness of our contemporary life as well as science. So I think the secular as sacred could be a good hint for our secular world, but with some kind of spiritual resources. That's why we have this lecture on spiritual humanism to reflect on the secular humanism from the Great Enlightenment movement. So the Enlightenment project is still going on. It's an endless job. So I think everybody is on the way. That's why the job of Professor Ross is very important. And we look forward to further good news from your department, your institute, and your great university, as well as yourself. Thank you very much, Professor Ross. So could you please make a conclusion remarks for our lecture to our audience? Thank you.
Yes. I want to thank all of you for your attentiveness, for your patience, for your practice of second person epistemology, epistemological approach. And I wish you all really good health. Please be well, stay healthy. And as I always say to my students, if you can, meditate every day, whatever form you practice. So 新年快乐 to everybody. Please be safe. And I'll see you somewhere down the road.
Okay, thank you very much. And welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. So Professor Ross, you can off the line, and it's too late for you. I'm sorry for that. And wish you good night.
I stay up late.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Good night. Good day.